We begin with the breaking news and a question or two. What is the real goal here? To stop a president the people just elected? To force him to fight a case at age 83 after his presidency? Judge Juan Merchan has just paused all deadlines associated with President-elect Donald Trump's New York criminal conviction. This move takes Trump's scheduled November 26th sentencing off the table. And the timing is whether to consider the effect of Trump's election as president on the conviction against him. I'm Harris Faulkner, and you are in the Faulkner Focus. The judge pushed back his own self-imposed deadline on whether to toss out the verdict after the U.S. Supreme Court's decision, which gives presidents broad immunity from criminal prosecution. That ruling is now expected on November 19th. So we have another delay, and we're going to wait to see what this judge does with that, even though the U.S. Supreme Court has weighed in. Trump's team called to freeze and ultimately throw out the entire case so he can focus on his second term as president. Again, what is the goal here? Is it to try to stop that from happening? The people have decided. A jury convicted Trump earlier this year of all 34 felony accounts of falsifying business records related to payments to an adult film worker, Stormy Daniels. And Jonathan Turley, constitutional law attorney, Fox News contributor, Anthony McCarthy, former assistant U.S. attorney and Fox News contributor, Carrie Urban, Fox News legal editor, and Leo Terrell, Fox News contributor and attorney, are all here with me now to break this down. So, Jonathan, I will start with you and my two questions. What truly could be the goal here? What does this accomplish? And really, can you subvert the people's will, or do you think they'll push it off till he's 83 and out of office?
Well, you know, a couple years ago, I said this election would be the largest jury decision in history, and it was. They rendered a verdict, and they rejected lawfare. And the Manhattan case is really one of the most prominent examples of lawfare. It was a ridiculous case that should not have been brought. Now, the Trump team did succeed in getting this delay. What they don't want is an indefinite status. They don't want this just to be lingering. They want to be able to get to a position where they can appeal. Keep in mind, they've never been able to get a full review of what happened at the trial. You know, this trial is riddled with reversible error, in my view. I was shocked in that courtroom watching some of these rulings, which made no sense to me. So they will be arguing in the next week that it's time for the judge to recognize reality and to dismiss this case. That would go against his pattern of ruling in the past. So, you know, Leo, I want to ask you about the certain cases that Trump faced in recent months and why this one in particular, and Jonathan just laid out the importance of it, and certainly politically, but why this one in particular they couldn't do something with along the way. And I know that the U.S. Supreme Court weighed in, but we saw cases falling apart. What makes this one so stubborn?
The state case. This is the state case where they had already in process a trial going on, and the convictions or the sentencing that is going to take place, but the conviction of 34 charges against Trump. And what's happening right now, Harris, is you have a judge acting like a politician instead of a judge. I mean, let's look at what is actually happening here. Official acts by the president are inadmissible per se. That is justification for dismissal. No one on this panel can sit here and tell anyone the impact of that inadmissible evidence on the jury. The judge should dismiss his case, but he won't. He's acting as a politician today instead of a judge. And what the Trump team has to do is insist that this case is resolved, taking no type of substitution like a pardon or some type of dismissal. President Trump's team needs to get a complete vindication because he's innocent of the charge. I still don't know what the underlying charge is.
So, Carrie, I've heard you say in particular about other cases, but certainly this one with a porn sex film worker in the middle of it all, Stormy Daniels, that some of this was put on to dirty up President Trump going into another election period. Can you talk about that a little bit and how this judge might look at kind of all of the salaciousness that we saw along the way?
Oh, for sure. I think in large part this case was driven by Matthew Colangelo. That's the man who left DOJ, top spot at DOJ to go assist Alvin Bragg in this case. I think they drove this case because they wanted the talking point of a convicted felon. And of course, the problem with all of that is in order for them to have made these so-called, misdemeanors felonies, they had to say that he was trying to cover up something else. The problem is we never learned what those something else's were. He didn't know. We don't know because the judge made a decision that the jury didn't have to tell us, which was crazy. So I have to say this, though, about what happened just now in the last hour. I'm actually not surprised. Donald Trump's legal team just asked Bragg's office a couple of days ago to pause the proceedings in light of the fact that he became president of the United States. So this is separate from the immunity question. So all that happened today was Judge Merchan said, okay, to the Bragg's office, give me your perspective on whether Donald Trump becoming president changes anything about this case. Because new constitutional questions are raised, because you have to remember the Department of Justice has a policy that says you can't indict, prosecute a sitting president. That's not been tested in the states, but in the spirit of that policy, in the spirit of the way we do justice in America, it is quite possible that Bragg's office submits a perspective along those lines to Judge Merchan next week.
So, Andy, if somebody were going to hire you to defend them and it were Donald Trump at this point, what advice would you give him as an attorney going forward now?
Well, I would do pretty much what they're doing. I'm not a Judge Merchan fan by any means, but I think all he did today was what the Trump team jointly asked him to do with the district attorney's office, which is give a 1-week delay. I think there's a couple of things going on here. I know that it's a hyper-technical legal point, and the rhetorical thing is more fun, but Trump actually is not a convicted felon. And I think what he wants, because that doesn't happen until judgment gets entered when he gets sentenced. Trump doesn't want to be sentenced. He doesn't want to be a convicted felon. So I agree with Jonathan that he'd like to get a clean sweep, and the best way it seems to get that would be on appeal. But he's not going to get to appeal unless he gets sentenced first, which he doesn't want. So what I think the Trump team is asking for is, I want you, Judge Merchan, to dismiss this case based on the Supreme Court's immunity ruling and the fact that Bragg deal and get a clean sweep. He would rather, if he could, not get sentenced in the first place and not be technically found a convicted felon. So he's hoping to get a dismissal, but he's hoping to get it from Judge Merchan.
So why is it that then during a presidential election, Democrats wanted to use the word anyway, convicted felon, or that phrase, and then suddenly it went away? I think you just answered that question because it hadn't happened yet in this particular case.
Right. I mean, politically.
Or that phrase, and then suddenly it went away. I think you just answered that question because it hadn't happened yet in this particular case.
Right.
Sentencing in this case. The American people have reelected President Trump with an overwhelming mandate. It is now abundantly clear that Americans want an immediate end to the weaponization of our justice system, including this case, which should never have been filed. So we can, and this is all a quote now, as President Trump said in his historic victory speech, unify our country and work together for the betterment of our nation. Jonathan, I'm going to get your response to that.
Well, I certainly agree this case should never have been brought. The case was based on, and in my view, an unprecedented application of these laws. The judge made a mess of this case with making reversible errors left and right. So I certainly agree with that. The question is whether this will weigh that heavily on the judge. The judge that I saw in that courtroom was not someone who would take a balanced approach to these questions. I did find him very balanced at the trial. The issue for the Trump administration, to build on Andy's really insightful remarks, is what's better for you. People will continue to refer to the conviction on these counts and the colloquial use of being a convicted felon are likely to continue. The idea, and Andy made an interesting suggestion, that this could be suspended for the upcoming term, but I would think that would be the worst of all options for the president
and for the country, by the way. And for the country, Jonathan, because then the question becomes, does he have to be careful in certain ways not to tick off some judge? I mean, this is a man who was under really unusual gag order rules the entire time. I mean, it really was hard to miss that across many cases. And so now you ask, if you're going to hold it till he's 83 and he's out of office, how does that impact what goes on between now and then? The people have voted. Leo, just a quick response to that, and then we'll move.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. To use this case and to hang it over Trump's head for 4 years is politics. And look, I've only been practicing law for 35 years. And I would just ask anyone to just answer this question. The inadmissible evidence of these official acts being introduced in trial, why can't the judge dismiss this case? Period. Just answer that question first. I don't understand it.
Wow.
It's inadmissible evidence. It impacted the jury. Why can't he dismiss it? Why wait next week? He could have dismissed this case, Harris, weeks ago. I don't understand it.
I thank you all, Jonathan, Andy, Carrie, and Leo. Thank you so very much for being with us. November 19th. I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other soon. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Well, a collective eye roll from critics. Federal employees reportedly say President-elect Trump's imminent return to the White House is giving them PTSD. Do you know how offensive that is, to particularly the day after Veterans Day, to our U.S. military men and women, whom some have suffered from actual PTSD, or any other victims of it? Plus, Trump's second-term White House is coming into sharper focus by the day, even by the hour.
We live in a 1776 kind of moment, reviving our constitutional ideals, and I think we want the best and brightest in every one of those roles.
Wasting no time putting his leaders in place for his second-term cabinet. He made history last week naming his 2024 campaign manager, Susie Wiles, as the first woman ever White House chief of staff. And now he's chosen Congressman Mike Waltz of Florida as National Security Advisor. Former Congressman Lee Zeldin of New York will head up the EPA. And first-term Senior Advisor Stephen Miller will serve as Deputy Policy Chief. Former Acting ICE Director Tom Homan has been tapped as the Border Czar, and Congresswoman Elise Stefanik for United Nations Ambassador for the United States. Senator Marco Rubio is expected to be nominated as Secretary of State, and South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem as Homeland Security Secretary. Former GOP presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy was at the transition meetings yesterday. Here he is.
Very well-run process, incredibly well-organized, meticulous, big focus on merit. And we're going to be able to pick the best and brightest to lead our government. And because of that decisive victory, because of Donald Trump's vision for the country, I think that's exactly what we're going to get in these cabinet positions and beyond.
Focus on merit. Speaking of which, sort of, Mark Meredith, who is in West Palm Beach, Florida. Mark.
Harris, good morning to you. Over the next several weeks, we expect to hear more about how some of Florida's political elite are making their way into a second Trump term. The latest news, as you mentioned, happening overnight with Fox learning that Florida Senator Marco Rubio expected to head up the State Department. Now, Rubio has been in the Senate since 2011, serving on both the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Intelligence Committee. And while he was once a Trump critic, he has certainly embraced Trump over the last few years, especially when it comes to continued U.S. support for Israel. While we don't know when a nomination might actually be submitted, one Democratic senator already appears on board. John Fetterman of Pennsylvania posting today, unsurprisingly, the other team's pick will have political differences than my own. That being said, my colleague Rubio is a strong choice, and I look forward to voting for his confirmation. Trump also planning to pick South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem to head the Department of Homeland Security. She was once considered a potential VP pick for Trump, but she fell out of contention after admitting in a book she had shot and killed her dog, who she claimed was unruly. Trump is also urging lawmakers in Washington to move quickly on his nominees by confirming them via recess appointment that would prevent any drawn-out debate over the procedure. We're hearing from Florida Senator Rick Scott, running for Majority Leader, who says he's on board with the idea.
We had a great Tuesday. We can all be way more excited. But if we don't have the right leader in the Senate, then what's going to happen is all the things that Donald Trump wants to do is going to get bogged down, not going to happen. Nominees won't get done. So I am absolutely committed to do whatever it takes to get his nominees confirmed and get his agenda passed.
While the focus here is today on Florida, Harris tomorrow, the president-elect, will be in Washington, and we've learned he's expected to also stop by Capitol Hill to meet with lawmakers as they get ready for a number of big decisions ahead. Harris.
Mark, great to see you. Thank you. In focus now, Ben Domenech, Fox News contributor and editor-at-large of The Spectator. First of all, your response to some of the choices here by the president-elect.
Well, I think it's a very strong list of names there, Harris, and I think that what we're seeing here is that, this is a very, small C Catholic kind of approach to running the cabinet, which is saying that you're going to pull from a lot of different corners of the Republican coalition that the president has expanded so dramatically. These are known names, they're reliable names, and they're names with government experience. One of the things we saw in the first Trump term was that there were a lot of people who ended up in jobs because while they had impressive resumes, they may not have come from the world of government. They may not be familiar with it. People like Rex Tillerson, for instance, who ended up running into difficulty when they had to adapt to the restrictions that are in place when you go into government and have to deal with the surrounding bureaucracy and all of the different ways that they try to, prevent you from achieving the president's agenda, as we are all familiar with by now. And I think that what we are getting here is a good mix of ideology and experience. People who are going to be able to navigate that world with a foreknowledge of what those bureaucratic hurdles are going to be, how to overcome them. And I think overall what you see there is a sign of strength when it comes to backing Israel, pushing back against Iran, pushing back against China, and really establishing American strength in the world again. And when it comes to the names, Tom Homan, Kristi Noem, this is clearly going to be an administration that prioritizes the border and is going to be tough on Mexico and on the cartels that have made it such Swiss cheese over the past 4 years.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Swiss cheese. I wrote that down, a mix of ideology and experience. Maybe we add in knowledge of who the toughest political players are with their games as well. So people are going to come in and they're going to be fresh and ready for, well, as Kamala Harris has said, the fight ahead. Border officials tell Fox News that morale is surging among border officials after Trump's victory. Well, yeah, they see some daylight now. Here's a quote. It's a total 180. Troops are finally feeling like the sun is coming out after a very long storm. Another, morale is even higher than the first time he won, and they know they can get the bad guys now. But we've also heard some Democrat state governors are promising to put up a wall, yes, a wall, of resistance against Trump's border policy.
If the Trump administration requests it, would the Massachusetts State Police assist in mass deportations?
No, absolutely not.
You come for my people, you come through me.
I want to tell Governor Pritzker that the people voted for Trump in many instances, some of his very own people. So who's he talking about protecting or fighting there, Ben?
Well, he's talking about protecting people who aren't Americans, which I just think is absolutely ridiculous. This is a situation that the Biden administration and the Biden-Harris administration brought on us through their terrible border policies, which were intentional, I believe, as many others do, in the first several years, and only changed when it became politically untenable for Democrats to defend how ridiculously out of control our border became. Alejandro Mayorkas to Kristi Noem is about as big of a change as you could possibly have, in any corner of government. And so I think that you're going to see the Trump administration be very serious in terms of their approach to this. And look, again, it's kind of building on the experience of the last time around. They know how much Democrats resisted the types of approaches that they had. And while it's good to come from outside and have the attitude of an outsider, it's also good to speak from experience and knowledge of what they're going to try to do to prevent you from achieving things for the American people. And the American people showed on Election Day that they care deeply about the security of the border. It's why you saw such a sweeping victory for the former president, and it's one of the key reasons he's headed back to the White House.
Yeah, you talk about a distance between the past and what's coming in terms of who's chosen. You couldn't be more different than the Vice President Kamala Harris, who just lost the way that you pointed it out there, much in part over this issue, and now Tom Homan comes in as the border czar. That is opposite in fact. And as you heard, garnering a lot of support from the troops at the Border Patrol. Well, federal employees who worked during the President-elect Trump's first administration are reportedly scared and anxious about his return to the White House.
We are in a new dystopian hellscape. That is from a federal employee via text message last night, and that is the mindset of many of the 2 million federal workers anticipating Donald Trump's return to office. As you know, Trump has obsessed on the campaign trail about the idea of federal workers being agents of the deep state working against him and his agenda. Now, some of the employees who lived through the first Trump administration say they are experiencing PTSD.
Yeah, you heard that right. They say that they have PTSD because they're upset about the new president. Well, if that is not enough, the State Department reportedly is holding coping sessions for those employees distraught over the election results. The Free Beacon obtained this internal email, quote, "Change is a constant in our lives, but it can often bring about stress and uncertainty. Join us for an insightful webinar where we delve into effective stress management techniques to help you navigate these challenging times." Critics are going off. Lose again and again until they fully become functioning adults once more. Another, these people just need to grow up. They are not cut out for a job at state. So that voice that I went into explaining, my mother said I should have been the announcer at those webinars. I don't know. But what I do know is the kind of help that they need is to keep their jobs. Why don't they just do the work?
Well, I think that, doing the work is always a challenge for America's bureaucrats, especially in Washington, D.C. Perhaps they can get to work, making a room for themselves with rubber and soft play. Maybe they should distribute a packet to deal with this that includes a blanket, some warm milk, and a nice binky, or something like that. It's absolutely absurd, Harris, but it's also something that I think is one of the reasons why they understand that this time around, as unsexy as it sounds, civil service reform is going to be something that this administration actually does, and I think does seriously. They've been planning for it for a while. It was one of the things they tried to do right at the end of the last term, and changing the way that bureaucrats are treated, especially some of the top bureaucrats who deserve to be hired and fired at the pleasure of the president. That's something that needs to happen, and frankly, I think it's going to happen early in this administration, and it's going to make a huge difference in the kind of resistance that we see these bureaucrats put up.
Yeah. All true. Ben Domenech, thank you. Great to have you always.
Good to be with you.
President-elect Trump will face a host of global challenges now, from wars in Ukraine and the Middle East to threats from China, North Korea, Iran, and of course our open southern and northern border to the... We don't talk much about the border to the north. What Trump's cabinet picks so far tell us about how he will handle foreign policy. President-elect Donald Trump's decisive victory last week was jarring, a wake-up call for the Democratic Party. In fact, their emotional reactions among party members and the liberal media continue.
This was a Marie Antoinette moment, the closest thing to a Marie Antoinette moment, where working class voters were uniting across racial lines to reject not just the Democratic Party, but the entire professional elite. I think they are remarkably out of touch.
We got a lot of calls about this piece, and it's an interesting message for Democrats. It really crystallized how some Democrats are finally waking up and realizing that woke is broke.
We are not listening to the people we claim to represent. We cannot win if we don't build a bigger tent.
Yet they lectured the nation for months about woke and told everybody else they must be wrong when they put men in women's sports. Democratic strategist James Carville says Vice President Harris failed Democrats because Democrats couldn't shake the stench of ideologies like wokeness and defunding the police. Democratic Congressman Pat Ryan says it's not enough to throw these seemingly disparate policies at people. Laura Trump laid it out this way.
I think unless the Democrats are able to really take a long, hard look at really how far off the scale of anything rational they've gone, I don't know that they ever come back to really win any elections.
A new op-ed is titled "Trump Won by Uniting Those Who Think Liberal Rulers Have Gone Too Far." Another opinion piece details how a liberal blogger recently posted 9 principles for common sense Democrats to rebuild a winning coalition. Do you think like Beyonce and Lizzo are part of it? They include recognizing the importance of robust economic growth and treating climate change as a reality to manage, not a hard limit to obey, and acknowledging that biological sex is not a social construct. All are sensible and are unlikely to stick. Even Democrats and institutions that don't subscribe to this faith may often be taken hostage by it. Power panel now. Matt Gorman, Executive Vice President of Targeted Victory and a former Tim Scott campaign advisor. Antoine Seawright, Blueprint Strategy founder and CEO. Antoine, I want to come to you first because when someone accuses your party, and they're a Democrat, and what just happened is the Marie Antoinette moment. I mean, that's tough to take. Kamala Harris left still in debt from all the money that she raised, paying off celebrities to be on public stages with her. I mean, it was a big miss with a big expensive bag.
Those who have their reflections and observations do their thing, but two things happen in elections, Harris. You win or you learn. What I think we should have learned from this election is that we have a constituency problem with certain type of voters in this country, predominantly rural, white, working class voters, where we did not have a very specific targeted microeconomic messaging that reached them where they are. Certainly the Latino community showed up in unique form to vote for President Trump. I think we have some work to do there. But by and large, I think we did not focus on Main Street and my street. We had a large focus on what some folks had to say on K Street. And that's what we have to learn, to meet folks where they are with messaging that makes sense to what their needs are.
Wow. Or any of the streets in Bel Air. I mean, those are streets too. Matt.
Yeah, no, look, one of the ads that really broke through was an ad that said, Kamala's for they, them, and President Trump is for us. And beyond the issue, that ad spoke to something broader. It spoke to culture. It spoke to priorities. When people were saying, hey, we can't afford our groceries, we can't afford a house, they're out there saying, well, have we talked to you about fascism? And have you met Liz Cheney yet?
Yeah.
And when, people are saying, hey, migrants are streaming into our communities, they're out there saying, but we spent $20 million for celebrities to throw a concert for you. Aren't you guys impressed? And when people are saying they're struggling, they give a bunch of spreadsheets and charts and economists to say, your experience is actually wrong. You're not as struggling. The economy's doing better than you think. It's that lecturing that people, I think, got sick of.
Well, I want to get to this. Former Obama advisor Dan Pfeiffer had this to say when it comes to Democrats losing working class voters, the ones that Antoine was just talking about.
We have a broader branding problem as a party. Like, we have allowed the Republicans to brand us as the party of cultural elites. And so we have this cultural disconnect from working class voters of all races that is preventing them from liking us. And so we've absolutely lost a branding war here. And we have to, I think for the party, we have to really think about how we fix that.
Wow, Antoine, he obviously has not heard what you had to say, and I wrote it down. You win or you learn. I mean,
those who have their reflections and observations do their thing, but two things happen in elections, Harris. You win or you learn. What I think we should have learned from this election is that we have a constituency problem with certain type of voters in this country, predominantly rural, white, working class voters, where we did not have a very specific targeted microeconomic messaging that reached them where they are. Certainly the Latino community showed up in unique form to vote for President Trump. I think we have some work to do there. But by and large, I think we did not focus on Main Street and my street. We had a large focus on what some folks had to say on K Street. And that's what we have to learn, to meet folks where they are with messaging that makes sense to what their needs are.
Wow. Or any of the streets in Bel Air. I mean, those are streets too. Matt.
Yeah, no, look, one of the ads that really broke through was an ad that said, Kamala's for they, them, and President Trump is for us. And beyond the issue, that ad spoke to something broader. It spoke to culture. It spoke to priorities. When people were saying, hey, we can't afford our groceries, we can't afford a house, they're out there saying, well, have we talked to you about fascism? And have you met Liz Cheney yet?
Yeah.
And when, people are saying, hey, migrants are streaming into our communities, they're out there saying, but we spent $20 million for celebrities to throw a concert for you. Aren't you guys impressed? And when people are saying they're struggling, they give a bunch of spreadsheets and charts and economists to say, your experience is actually wrong. You're not as struggling. The economy's doing better than you think. It's that lecturing that people, I think, got sick of.
Well, I want to get to this. Former Obama advisor Dan Pfeiffer had this to say when it comes to Democrats losing working class voters, the ones that Antoine was just talking about.
We have a broader branding problem as a party. Like, we have allowed the Republicans to brand us as the party of cultural elites. And so we have this cultural disconnect from working class voters of all races that is preventing them from liking us. And so we've absolutely lost a branding war here. And we have to, I think for the party, we have to really think about how we fix that.
Wow, Antoine, he obviously has not heard what